Hello, this is Odomne, and you're on the YouTube channel of the internet's most notorious ginger man, Thorin.
Right, this is going to be another episode of Thorin's Rotations. Obviously, it's the LCK region because I'm here with Ashley again. And our guest for this episode is the man known as Valdes, enemy of Reddit, purged from the land due to fraudulently pretending to have knowledge about League of Legends. And you know what? The number one crime you did, Brendan, if I have to say, is you took someone else's idea that was a really good idea and you said it when it was applicable. And to me, that is the ultimate crime, any commentator. What a weird drama that was, dude. Like, of all the fake dramas I've ever seen, people just waking up and getting mad at you when you were basically doing, like, fucking solo casts at times. Like, and that's going to be one of the strangest things for Reddit to just get mad at I've ever seen. Mate, you were doing nothing wrong.
Yeah, I don't know what it was, but I think it got a lot worse once you
responded.
Myself.
Unfortunately, it tends to go that way if you notice.
Yeah, and I was talking with a lot of people, and they were like, "Oh, well, maybe you should just keep the moral high ground and just say, okay, you guys have some decent points, which I think there was
behind the insults. There's usually like a grain of truth, right?
Yeah, it was a thread that had some truths within it and some realities based on what we were dealing with, right? And I kind of took it, and I was, pretty angry that night, and I wrote up this long tweet, and I just threw it out there. And maybe that was the wrong idea, but yeah, it was.
I understood it though. You were frustrated, obviously, right? You were just frustrated at. I'm sure, because the other thing people don't get about that is, in the same way as when someone makes a thread like that, usually, I'm sure something else is bothering them in their life, but they get frustrated over this minor thing, and they outrage on the internet. But, to be fair, when you respond, it's the same thing. You think of all, the small, snide comments people make to you, and then this is where you get a chance to respond. But I know what you mean, though, because unfortunately, that is a weird trend. You think to yourself, right, well, if I just respond and tell people, no, that's not what happened, and that's not what I was thinking, what happens bizarrely is then, a different set of people get mad. Then they get mad. But why are you mad at us? And then they get. I agree. It just sort of never ends, mate. You have to just sort of just let it die out. I feel like.
Yeah, and that's what I did, because the next day I went into cast with Atlas again. Because we were doing the whole week basically together.
Oh, that's great as well. When you have to go back. Yeah, exactly. It's not like he's coming back. You've already been criticised. I bet even though you don't want to, the second you sit down, you were thinking at first that's in the back of my mind now. If I start talking.
Yeah, we certainly we switched some things up. I tried to take a much more kind of objective approach and say, well, let's see how it goes, right? I'm going to take some of the positives from the thread and say, okay, well, maybe people are sick of, hearing the same thing day in, day out. So let's try some new stuff. And there was no hate after that. I didn't receive anything else. There was mostly outpourings of love, actually, from the majority of the community.
Cool people came in for sure, and so everyone was going a bit hard. There's two things with that though, mate. One is, unfortunately, because LCK has so many best of threes and you cast so much, I think you're getting a factor that happens to everyone in casting, which is that famous idiom we have in English, familiarity breeds contempt. The more that you're around someone, the more it's like rooming with someone. Even if you love them at the beginning of rooming with them, by the end you're just annoyed that they leave the fridge open or they take the extra, because the problem is at that point in time you've just focused in on the very minor thing that's annoying you. Because if you notice, most of the times when they complain about casters, it's not something huge, like the guy just has a voice you can't listen to. It like on Marshals, for example, people always complain about the basic things that everyone says as part of their language to get from one, segues, like famously apparently I say stuff like, here's the thing or whatever. It's like when I start every rant or whatever. But the problem with that is people aren't realizing you're not supposed to have been around a person so long that you pick up on those things. If we were in real life, you'd meet me twice, wouldn't you? Wouldn't have 7,000 hours of me just going, and here's the thing, it's going to get annoying after that long. The problem is we're a bit oversaturated in that sense, because the thing is, I actually didn't feel like the basic premise had a point, Brendan, because to me the idea that you were stealing their ideas, you weren't. You even credit them. Basically, to me, it goes like this. When you work on a cast like the LCK is a good one, where you have a big over-imposing figure, Papa Smithy, Monte Cristo, LS. They're basically the thinker of that region in the English language, and they're coming up with the terminology and the concepts and a lot of the storylines. So actually it makes perfect sense to refer to some of the stuff they're saying, because that is one of the things that's connecting all the broadcasts. You know, they're not all like distinct entities. So I feel like that whole thing went a bit too far, mate. Like, definitely, I agree with you. If you can go beyond like what seems like the insults and find like some useful criticism, yeah, do it. But don't take too much of it to heart, mate. I think they went too far on that.
Yeah, and that's why afterwards I was like, okay, I got pretty heated, you know. I didn't look at the second thread that I heard about. Negative.
Yeah, well done.
Like,
there you go.
Okay.
Okay.
Just let it go. Okay. People were angry that I responded. That's understandable in a way because, I mean, I guess, you know, casters do take a lot of criticism. They would expect us in this position to be able to handle that to a certain extent. So when one of us kind of lashes out in a way, they're very taken aback where it's like, whoa, you know, what, you should be able to take this criticism. And then, you know, that gets the gears turning.
Sure.
And they're like, what, you know, you shouldn't be able to, you know, respond to me in that way. But
anytime the word should is used on the internet, I've noticed it's always like someone else just telling someone else really hard to do it. You should just do all this and then you should do this. Like, can we just stop that word? Like, that's just like, what are you doing? What do you think about all this, Ashley? What do you think as like an observer and watching it all?
Oh, wow. I wasn't expecting that. I don't know. Like, going back to Thorin's thing, I think the biggest thing is like, you know, it's like the criticism come in masses and people come in and out of those conversations as like this like thread of conversation continues. And
Sure.
some people might not pick up the beginning of the conversation and just come in the middle of it and see the
Yes.
latest response and then go
Yes.
like, you know, oh, why is this person saying this out of nowhere? Like, you know, why is he like hating on the community? But it's like so
Yes.
difficult to respond to that as a single person when like, you know, people come in and out, and especially with LCK, you know, different people respond in different time zones. So first EU people might
Yes.
comment on it, and later the NA people might come and only see the second thread. So,
Yeah.
you know, and when a situation like that rises, that you, with the logical person, you expect people to like, you know, look at the whole conversation and make a judgment out of that. But maybe in that way, if I expect that, maybe I'm just like overrating certain parts of the community, perhaps. Yeah.
No, I think you're right there. Actually, that is something, to be fair, that's hard to think of if you're the person. Is like for example, one of the reasons people get butthurt if you respond is some of them think that nothing happened before that. They've only seen your response, so they're like, "Oh, look at this cast is so entitled. What, are we all supposed to like it?" Like, there's always some weird angle where you're like, "What? That wasn't even what I was responding to. I was responding to this different guy." But you're right, Ashley. Like, maybe they didn't see that thread. Maybe they're just experiencing it now. I actually had the same thing happen to me in Counter-Strike, believe it or not, where a pro player replied to me on Twitter in kind of a bit of like a shitty tone, and so I replied in like similar tone. I sort of told him to go fuck himself, right? This was reported all over the internet. It's like, Thorin attacks player. It's like, what? I was responding to it. Like, how am I the one doing the attack? Like, you know, but it's the same principle. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's true. If you didn't see what he said, you'd think I was the one doing it, but I wasn't. I was just, if you just scrolled up on the thread, for fuck's sake, scroll up.
yeah.
Anyway, luckily there's no drama involved in the LCK playoffs, of course. So let's start talking about that, right? Here's the thing, Brendan, is there's a lot of narratives in the LCK that I'm even going to admit it, even though it doesn't really make sense, right? I have a principle in most esports games. Like, I hate generally, I know Ashley and a lot of Koreans like this approach, but it's not my style. I don't like to connect lineups that are quite different from each other just because they played for the same org. So, for example, I didn't like traditionally to talk about like SK Telecom as an org. If you're talking about the lineup that had like Wolf, Bang, Bengi, like, to me, it doesn't make sense to talk about T1 like that now because there's only Faker. Like, he's the only player remaining. Like, that's the only connection. But I can't lie. For some bizarre reason, like, apparently the universe disagrees with me because I noticed that the same storylines have played out even in this T1, even when there is only Faker. Like, they do always have to start earlier in the playoffs. They do always do this mad run to the final. If they get to the final, whoever was number one, they just beat them anyway. Like, so the problem is, Valdes, I would normally say, we'll treat this T1 totally differently. You know, it's a different year, it's a different split. It's like, but this looks like the same storyline I've seen way too many times, mate, where they just start out and they're going to beat, like, T1, they'll probably beat fucking Gen.G, and then start ruining the playoffs for everyone. So do you believe it? Do you think T1 could do it this year? Because there's obviously been a lot of like potentially external things that people are worried about. The whole closer scenario. Like, no one really knows where T1's at. Like, there was a time in the middle of this, but where they're looking like they'll get their shit together. But where do you see T1 now? Can they do like a big run in this playoff gauntlet, you think?
Well, you were talking about the drama at first, and I remember I was watching and I was on Twitter while the last series was going on of T1 versus DRX, and a lot of fans were getting angry that Faker was put into the second game and given a champion that couldn't carry, and then Closer came back in and then won. So a lot of fans were angry, even though T1 won. And overall, I think it's a pretty good look for the team that they defeated DRX, who is, second place, that Closer got the spotlight, which is kind of interesting.
Because their logic presumably was they think Faker was sort of set up to look like he was like the worst of the two, and then Closer got to be the hero or something bizarre like that, right?
Yeah, but I mean, that would, that is just not, it's just not the case.
That seems a bit of a reach to me, yeah, I know.
And it's not only the coaches that have a say on the drafts as well. I know that Faker is very vocal in terms of what champion he wants to play, at least. And maybe
he's also played a lot of Galio in his career. It's not like he would say no in theory, right?
Very comfortable on the champion.
Yeah.
I didn't see it as a very strange pick. I think that the early game went south really quickly, and that was part of the reason why they did lose game number 2, and then had Closer come in again. I also thought it was a little bit strange that Closer got subbed out for game 2 as well, because he had a really fantastic game on Akali, because we were all talking about, this guy's only played against, the lower level mids, is he really that good? Faker's probably going to come in for the playoffs anyway. And then he comes out in game 1 and he kind of, he does really well against Chovy in the lane, which even, other big top laners or mid laners have struggled.
He's supposed to be the best laner, let's be real. Yeah, exactly.
So Closer comes out and does really well. Obviously, the matchup had something to do with it, but he had a good look. So there is some drama for T1 and their fans coming into playoffs once again. In terms of if they can do well, I mean, I'm not sure about these playoffs, but I think they're in the right direction, right? As long as, they took out DRX. I think in terms of direction, DRX might be on the downswing, whereas T1's on a little bit of an upswing, especially because Closer is playing well. If Closer wasn't playing well and Faker was struggling a little bit, and, he's not at his top form right now, I wouldn't say, then they would be in a little bit of trouble, because who are they going to play? Do they have a mid laner that can actually do well going into playoffs, into Worlds potentially? That would be a struggle. But because Closer's coming in doing well, I'm sure Faker's going to turn things on once the best of fives come in. I think they're in a pretty good spot. Now, I don't know if anyone can beat Damwon, first of all, in these playoffs. I don't think that's realistic.
They've got a long way to go before they have to worry about that, though. They have to win like 3 series, so,
Yeah, we'll see if they get through Gen.G first. I think they should definitely make it through Afreeca.
Just with the way the split's gone, sure.
Yeah, I don't think that should be too difficult. The thing about T1 also is that they only need to hit like 3rd or something to get a direct seed into into Worlds or something like that.
Yeah, that would make sense. Certainly, top 3 goals
based off of points because they won Spring.
Right.
So I ran a huge trade on this because I wanted to calculate the possibility of each team getting into the playoffs. So the crux for T1
Worlds
is, they have to win against Afreeca.
Yeah.
So if they don't, they're they have to do the regional gauntlet no matter what. So for people who are more familiar with the EU system, Korea does still have gauntlet system. So even if you do get eliminated from playoffs pretty early on, you play another regional gauntlet. But if T1 loses to Afreeca, they're out no matter what. If T1 loses to Gen.G, then they still make it to Worlds if Gen.G wins the whole thing.
Right. Because Gen.G was second in the first split. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
Yeah. So, and if they win against Gen.G, they do go to Worlds no matter what, because they're at 3rd above, and like Valdes has just mentioned, they do have enough points to make it to Worlds. So I think it's actually quite unfortunate, I would say, for T1 that about the order of the playoffs, because I look at the order. They're going against Afreeca, so I think T1 is definitely the favorites there. Then they don't face DRX after that. They face Gen.G. And we just talked about the narratives, and I know that it's difficult to rely fully on the narratives, but Gen.G always seem to have a bit of a mental block when it's going against T1.
Yes.
But we remember that 0-3 finals 2020 Springs, but Gen.G seem to have finally broken that losing streak against T1 in the second round of Summer Split when they defeated T1. So I think Gen.G would actually have a mental high ground there. So if T1 loses to Gen.G, that's tough.
One thing I want to say, though, is I actually, listen, I totally get why fans might be outraged about it. If people don't know, if you're a Westerner, a lot of fans in Korea, in fact, the whole system, as far as I know, as to how they actually invented, like, esports fandom in Korea, was they modelled it on the idol system of how, like, K-pop and soap operas and these things work, where you have a favourite character, a person in the band that you follow that for whatever reason you relate to, or if you're a man and it's a girl group, you're the one that you're most attracted to or whatever. And the idea is you just support that person. But the problem with that approach is it means that it's a bit like, the best example I would give would be like Sneaky in North America. Even when there were times when he wasn't a very good player, he had a lot of fans. And so if he was benched or if he wasn't picked up again by Cloud9, for example, even if his fans on some level know he's not like the best player anymore, well, they don't care, do they? They're a fan of him. They want to see him. They want to see him in a good team. So like, I understand why fans will get mad from that angle, but I actually think if you take away the name Faker, you forget that it's, you know, a person with all these amazing accomplishments. What you actually see in the server, this split, I think it's totally fair that they tried bringing in Closer. Like, Faker actually looked a bit limited. Like, you only had a couple of champions, basically Azir and Twisted Fate, that he was looking good on. Aside from that, he didn't have most of the rest of the champion pool, and we've got a lot of good mid laners, as we've talked about on some past episodes. So, if you look at the fact that Closer, I mean, even from all his solo queue heights, this is the guy playing all the assassins. This is the guy going super. He's like Faker from 2013. That's like the kind of person he's trying to be, basically. So I actually think even to sub in him out, it almost makes sense because you sub one in depending on what the comp you want to do. Like this series here is a great example. If you want to play Galley, oh yeah, go back to Faker. That's experience, map movement. If you want to play the assassin and just go for kills, yeah, bring in this young guy. Like I think it's fair. I don't think it's like I actually think I could even see like the strategical logic if they're going to do it in the playoffs. Maybe they sub them for certain games or something. Valdes, what do you think?
Sorry, I just had.
Do you think they'll sub Faker and Closer in and out in the playoffs?
I think it really depends on how they're playing, right? Like that's why the decision to bring in Faker for Game 2 against DRX was so confusing for me. It's like, in my mind, if the player plays really well, just keep him in, right?
Yeah,
and I
sure.
think they'll probably do that a little bit more in the playoffs, and if they don't, I think that would be a little bit confusing to me. So I've tried many times to try to decipher a lot of T1's decisions, right, including their drafts and some of the decisions they make with subbing in different players and stuff like that. We all have. And it's always been a little bit of a mystery at times. I think that if, you know, my original thought was if Closer comes out, start him because he's currently playing a lot and he's playing well. If he does well, keep him in. If he fails and looks really nervous, then bring in the veteran, bring in the big gun, bring in Faker, see how he does. If he also fails, then, I mean, you're probably going to lose the series if neither of your mid lane is doing really well. So that would be my idea. If you wanted me to predict, like, what T1 would actually do, I think maybe, you know, we've seen teams do this in the past, even with games on the line, where it's like, you know, we're gonna go with Faker here, even though Closer just went, you know, like 6-0. We're gonna see what Faker can do, and just throw him out. You know, we got the first win in the series, and I mean that can be dangerous. We've seen it blow up in the past on certain teams, so I worry about T1 when it does come to that first best of 5 against Gen.G, assuming they make it there.
Ashley, what do you think about the Freaks? Because even though they've gotten this last playoff spot, unfortunately, it's like there isn't much hype for them in the playoffs because they're pretty famous for like beating up all the bad teams. And then almost every single time they played a playoff team, they just lost and it was usually fairly convincing. So what do you expect? What are their chances in the playoffs?
Okay, I just talked about the whole, like, you know, Gen.G, the T1 Gen.G thing is a bit unfortunate for T1, given the recency bias. And I can apply the same thing for Afreeca T1. Like, the last match that both Afreeca and T1 played, it was against each other, where T1 looked more dominating against Afreeca. So I think that's going to be a huge, like, a mental ground. And also, I saw that individual laners on T1 was better than Afreeca, and Afreeca's like the meta has shifted slightly after the recent patch. Like, you know, everyone's talking about how this is like the more jungle carry meta, and I think that T1 might be able to shift to this current meta faster than Afreeca. So given that, it doesn't look too hopeful towards Afreeca's victory.
What do you think, Valdes? You got any chances?
I mean, they had so many games to prove it, right, in the regular season, and they couldn't even do it once. And I think that's pretty telling of where they're at right now. A lot of Afreeca, a lot of the players there, they have a lot of talent, but then sometimes I see them come out, and it seems like a little bit of it's like their mental game is hurting a little bit, you know? Like they have the talent, but sometimes it seems if they get behind early, they seem a bit down. They're not playing at their top level. Notably, Fly has always been.
He's had his issues, yeah.
Yeah, he's been up and down. Spirit, I think, has been a little bit like that this season as well.
Yes.
And even though Keen is seemingly coming back into form and looking pretty good once again, even though he was struggling a little bit towards, the beginning of summer. I don't think he's going to be able to do it alone, and I think every other team up in the top 4 is just currently in a better state of mind as a team, and they've had really good results against Afreeca before. It's going to be a best of 3, so there could be some shenanigans where Afreeca really try to throw a wrench into things, but if they don't and T1 just beat them straight up in the first game, it's hard to logically think that they would have any chance.
Like, I gotta be honest, like, even though I really like Keen and he's done amazing things in the LCK in the past, if I had to rate the 2 top laners right now, I'll actually rate Kana higher. He can play the tanks as well as, like, play the carry champions. So Afreeca no longer has that, hey, our top lane is going to win the lane matchup no matter what, and we can snowball from that. Like, they no longer have that as, like, the victory condition. And we saw that, Closer has won the lane against Afreeca, and I'm sure that, like, Faker, given a similar champion like Akali, can achieve the same feat. The only scenario where I see Afreeca beating T1 is in a specific meta where it's like an art and sensor meta. Mystic gets, everyone can support Mystic and Mystic tries to carry, but that's simply not the meta at the moment, so.
Yeah. No, the main problem, I think, always for Freaks is going to be the mid lane, unfortunately. Like, their mid jungle just isn't that good, and, like, there's some very good... Not T1, not so much, but some of the other teams are amazing in that regard. So I agree. I don't think they're going to do much. Right, what obviously, for the rest of the matchups, you have to do, in theory, like, you have to shadow box them all, because no one technically knows who plays who. But there's a good chance T1 plays Gen.G again. Right, as Ashley said earlier, obviously, like, psychologically, there has to be some sort of barrier for those Gen.G players. Like, the way they looked, I thought they were going to win that last split, but then again, I also thought that all the past on to SKT upset the team that was first place. So, Valdes, what do you think? Like, what have you thought of Gen.G over this split? Obviously, this split mainly, if people didn't watch it much, was mainly just about DRX and Damwon most of the time. They were like the clear dominant teams. But Gen.G was always sort of like just behind them. What have you thought of them?
Well, the thing that concerns me about the LCK right now in general is, we're thinking about Gen.G here, but we're also talking about T1 and DRX. I want to lump them all kind of into the 3 that are below the king that is kind of Damwon right now. They've all shown in the regular season that they've had these lapses in their games where when we're talking about Gen.G here, like even BDD, the guy who won the MVP of the split, the POG, the player of the game of the split, right? 1,300 points, which is an insanely high number. People have won with 1,000. And some games he'll come out and it's like, what happened to BDD? He's really good and that's obvious, but he's not playing at his top level. Whereas a team like Damwon will just kind of be running on all cylinders at all times. And DRX have had their problems as well in terms of, I think they have some young players that are, they've
definitely looked sloppy at times for sure.
Yeah. Especially when it comes to best of 5s. And so we're talking about, Gen.G versus T1 in the first matchup, assuming after the wild card match of T1 versus the Freaks. I think that T1 actually have a pretty good chance. I mean, Gen.G are good and they've gotten a higher record and all that stuff. T1 have had their struggles, but with T1 on the up and up, especially after defeating DRX in the last matchup, I think that I would actually rate T1 a little bit higher going into that one. I think that some of the top players on the side of Gen.G have become a little bit flat coming into playoffs, like BDD and Clid specifically. Obviously, Ruler is like, he's pretty damn good. Like,
Sure.
I would probably rate him as the best AD carry right now in the LCK, and I don't think that should turn too many heads. The guy has popped off many times. He's extremely consistent. He has
Great meta for him. Everything,
It's
yeah.
a great meta. He can play so many of the AD carry champions that are in the meta right now. He has been to the World Finals and won, and he has played in super stressful best of fives against great teams and won, and made the game breaking play that wins his team the game. So I think if Gen.G are going to win, I think it's going to come from Ruler, and Life is a little bit of a question mark. There are games where he looks really good and other games where you kind of just don't notice him. But I think if the two of them, Ruler and Life, can come together, especially Ruler, then that would probably be the way that I think Gen.G would win that best of five.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think, Ashley? I mean, you said before about the history and like the fact that if T1 loses, they need Gen.G to win to qualify, etc. But who do you actually think wins the match?
So, like, I slightly disagree with Valdes on the fact that I do think that BDD is quite consistent. Like, when he looked a bit iffy, it was more like the whole team just like looking divided in the shot calls. But BDD by himself, I would say, looks quite consistent. The only issue, if I had to say, that I do have with BDD, because you can't really criticize it when it comes to just sheer performance, is he's too reliant on Azir. Like, yeah, which is expected because he looks amazing whenever he gets Azir. Like, he does the super stream and tosses every time. We don't even scream when he does that. It's like, oh yeah, BDD doing his usual thing on Azir. But it's been so weird that LCK teams don't really ban Azir against BDD, and part of the reason might be a lot of the ban cards still go towards bot lane because they also try to suppress Ruler, who I do agree with Valdes is a supreme AD carry at the moment. But maybe it's because of that, like BDD's Azir is usually left to run wild. What's going to happen if T1 decides to ban Azir non-stop? Because if I make an assumption that Closes is going to start on this series, he can perform really well on Akali, and he's not necessarily not going to mind it that Azir is getting banned all the time. On the top lane, I will actually say the matchup looks quite equal. Like, yeah, Kana does look really good, but Rascal has stepped up so much, especially in the summer split. So I would actually say the top lane matchup looks quite even. And yes, T1 did look like they're on a better form. Like, they have been on a win streak in the last 4 matches. Was it 5 matches? 4 matches. But at the same time, they were mostly going against the lower, like LCK teams lower in the standings. So I do wonder what's going to happen if they do go against like a stronger team like Gen.G, because when T1 went against Damwon recently, they didn't even stand up a chance. So yeah, I think Gen.G is slightly more favorable here. Slightly more favorable.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea you bring up about the current mid meta as well. Talking about BDD really reliant on Azir. BDD is also a great Akali player on top of that. So I would be...
He's coming back, right? Yeah.
Yeah, he's been playing it a lot recently. Now, he hasn't looked as good as some other players, especially... I think right now the best Akali performance that I've seen in recent times was actually Keen, which is... I do kind of agree with you that Keen isn't, he's not quite the, powerhouse juggernaut that he was, but... he does from time to time have those stellar performances, and that's really the one that comes to mind for me for Akali. But I think there will be a large focus on Akali in the mid lane. I mean, even both of their top laners can play it.
Yeah,
We both know that Rascal and Kana can play Akali on top of that. So we've got 4 players that are going to be looking at Akali. The other interesting thing about the mid lane is that Zoe doesn't get played nearly as often. And I think an unfortunate thing that happened to BDD was that when he was really popping off in the middle of summer, he was playing a ton of Zoe, and we were all like,
sure.
Who is this guy? Like, how can you defeat BDD's Zoe? He was like getting that kind of praise. And then all of a sudden, it's still played from time to time, but it's not nearly as dominant or present, I would say, in pick bans compared to some other teams.
Which also affects Closer, right? Because,
he plays a lot,
he's been playing more Akali, but in the beginning of his split, he was playing tons of Zoe. It's like going super aggressive on them.
Actually, I want to have a discussion about this, right? So if people don't know, as you mentioned, like the way that MVP is calculated in Korea is literally they just add up the points you get from how many player of the game awards you had, which is a different approach. Like I can see the logic. The logic is like these are the amount of games where you were the best in. Therefore, if you have the most at the end of the split, you're the best player. The problem I have with that is there's a natural flaw, in my opinion, to that system, which means that you end up with sometimes someone winning that doesn't make as much sense. Because the main problem is, I think this split's a good example, is like BDD would certainly be one of my candidates. He'd be, you know, if I had to name the names of the people who should be considered, he'd be up there. But if I look even at the way that the player of the game breakdown worked, the real reason he won is because Damwon Gaming shares too many of the player of the games. Like, really, if you're Showmaker, it's not that you played worse than BDD, it's just your problem is sometimes Canyon popped off or Nagori had a great game. So as a result, like, mainly if Gen.G wins, it's just BDD. Because the weird thing is, I've noticed, we had the same thing used to happen in Counter-Strike. We had a very great team in Counter-Strike who was from Brazil, right? And their star player, Cold Zera, his style of play basically was facilitated by his team. So the logic was, if they won the tournament, odds are he was the MVP because that's basically the way their team played. And I feel like it's the same with BDD. Like, this guy's almost built to win those MVP awards because every time he's an MVP, he always has like an aggressive jungler that he works with. The two of them just win the game, and then he probably gets all the kills because he's the carry. So like that's a prime formula to win that MVP award. So my question is this: if we imagine for a second, like that's the official MVP, but let's imagine we have an unofficial one. Who would you actually have picked for yours, Valdes? Would it have been BDD? Would he be your MVP? Would you have a different player you would prefer for this split? Who's your most valuable player for this summer split?
Well, I think I would place at least 2 players above him. I would say Canyon has had the most insane breakout season, I think, of really anyone. But that's more of like a breakout, you know, kind of thing. But in terms of like
improved player, one more for that
like
one.
most,
Yeah.
Like, improved player
Sure.
by far, like he was already like pretty good.
Yeah,
now,
he had potential before. Yeah,
crap, you know. And talking about metas, like this meta is perfect for him.
Yes.
But in terms of like the one guy on top who's kind of carrying in my mind, I guess it would just have to be Showmaker. I don't think anyone really plays to his level right now, which is really scary. And including a lot of, you know, almost all the teams from abroad. I think it's really going to come down to those.
I think he's a contender for best player in the world. I think that's fair.
Well, that's the question, right? When we get to the world,
I think it's fair though. Just the eye test, I mean, like the eye test looks amazing.
Yeah, but I wonder how he's going to do against like...
yeah, sure. Knight and all those guys, yeah. Knight and Rookie are the obvious two. Caps, you know, these guys, yeah.
Yeah, some of those big names, and I mean, that's going to be super hype. Assuming it happens. There is still a chance that Damwon loses the finals and then doesn't qualify for regionals, but I don't think that's going to happen. But there is still a chance.
So you're going, like, you want to mention Canyon, but you probably go and Showmaker as your MVP?
Yeah.
Okay. Who do you have, actually? Because I'll admit I had the same as Valdes, actually. I thought Showmaker, just because, first of all, his team was the best. I agree, he certainly had help. Like, actually, now he's looking like he has amazing teammates. But then again, you can't blame him for that. Like, everyone would have said the opposite at the beginning of the year, that he should have had less help than the DRX players and the T1 players. Those are supposed to be the super teams. And then, listen, just the eye test alone. I will say, unfortunately, the eye test will always be biased to flashy players, because it just looks more impressive when they do some crazy shit. But just even the crazy shit he's doing, like, it really is reminiscent of like Prime Faker type stuff. It's that sort of level of outplay. So I think it's very impressive. Yeah. Well, who do you have, Ashley? Who would your MVP be?
Can you mention anyone else other than Showmaker at this point? Like, even from Gen.G, like, it would, if I had to pick an MVP just from Gen.G, it would be very close for me between BDD and Roller. Like, again, we mentioned that, you know, Korean MVP system tends to award more flashy players, but I think Roller has been such a good pillar for the team that was like critical to this team's success in the summer split. So that's me, but like, you know, you just gotta give it to Showmaker. Like, he's just perfect in everywhere. He just works super well with, you know, the bot side as well as the top side. He's a very map impact mid laner. Maybe not as Cavs, but he certainly spends more time like roaming out to other lanes and getting the effective kills. Like, you know, that's why his Twisted Fate is such a contested pick that often gets banned away from him. And like, you know, his Zoe is spectacular, and when his Zoe is not around, like, he just picks anything else. Like, we even recently saw that he can play a really decent Azir. He's a great Akali player. He's always got the Kassadin pick. When Showmaker decides to play Kassadin, it's not like, okay, let's just kind of like, hide and farm until I'm level 16. He's just actively going into skirmishes, trying to get more stacks ASAP. So, he's got the champion pool. He's got the mechanics. He's got the map awareness. He's working super well with the team. So, no reason not to pick Showmaker.
I'm with you on the Ruler angle though. Like for me, Ruler and Teddy are like the sleeper carries of LCK because they're just so stable. You build your team around them, but the problem is then like it's the mid laner who gets the glory or the top laner or something. Like that's just unfortunately always the curse of being the reliable guy, but who's not the fucking star face, as it were. That's curse of any carry.
That's part of the reason why Rascal gets no love.
Yes,
He's
of course.
Also, like this super stable, consistent player, never gets solo killed. He's not super aggressive. He actually turned up his amount of solo kills that he got in the second round as well. So I think that started to get people noticing him a little bit more. But definitely a very underrated player in the LCK. And, we were talking about flashing plays and mid laners like Azir's. One of the most flashy, you run in there right in the back through the enemies and you push 3 of them directly into your team. And you get the crazy, all the casters and fans are screaming. Yeah. The DD effect is back again. And he could probably do nothing else in the game except that one play. And there were times where he was receiving player of the game votes because of that. And, nothing against BDDs. He is consistent and he is a great player. So he does deserve a lot of glory and fans and stuff. It's just that, on this idea about, flashy players receiving player of the game votes and a lot of attention, that is definitely true, I think, for BDD.
Also, he's had enough MVPs. Come on, man. You've had like fucking 4 now. Come on, share. Just let someone else win one. They're allowed to as well.
Teammates even,
Because that's the only thing. Even though, I will admit, in all the splits pretty much that he won MVP, it wasn't a ridiculous one. There's been some ones in past years where I've thought there was somewhere it was just one good player on a team and they won the MVP or was just too boosted. But he definitely was within that. It's just my problem is this. If someone looks back in history and they're like, wow, this BDD guy won the MVP nearly every split. Was he just the greatest player ever? It's not really. Don't go too far on it. He just happened to be the most eligible in this bizarre system, right? There's a match that we have to talk about because everyone's expecting it, which is if you even look at the way the gauntlet is set up and you look at the way the split went, the split basically was a story of DRX versus Damwon. And the problem is, even though right up until the last week, DRX technically was holding atop the league, they were number 1 in the rankings. Obviously, they not only dropped that at the end, but every time they played Damwon, even though technically they're 1-1, I feel spiritually that's 2-0 Damwon because that first one, Damwon did everything in their power to throw that series. And then the second one, they just looked fucking good. So my problem is this, even though I think it's a great matchup in many ways, stylistically, obviously if you're an LS fan, these are the fucking Saints versus the Sinners. It's the ultimate example of real League of Legends versus the heresy that he sees in the LPL.
Yeah.
There's all the factors. Damwon looks clean when they win. DRX always looks sloppy. There's a million factors you can go to. But the problem is at the moment, it's looking one-sided to Damwon. Do you actually think, Ashley, there's a world where DRX is going to win LCK? Think it's doable?
Is there a world where Damwon Gaming does not win the LCK?
That's another way to say it.
That's my question.
Okay.
We talked about the Elite Four, but honestly, it's not even Elite Four anymore. It's Elite 3 and then Damwon Gaming just being Damwon Gaming at the very top. It's been so crazy. We didn't necessarily always believe in them in the beginning of the split. Hey, they're gonna have this spike in performance, and then maybe it's gonna slowly trail down. And perhaps that is expected because again, recency bias kicks in, and we've seen Damwon Gaming perhaps flop in more important patches in best of 5 scenario, but they've become not only more consistent but more confident in their own ability to success in every 2-0 match, very quick 2-0 matches that they play, that I think that even in the best of 5 scenario, it's not going to dent them. And I know that this has been repeated again and again, a broken record that Damwon Gaming were always the scrim gods. I even talked to Mickey from G2 Esports recently, who just reminded me, even back in 2018 Worlds when they were just challenger team, they were going around smashing everyone. And if this is the Damwon Gaming that finally have their scrim capabilities unleashed, difficult to predict that any of the other Elite 3 teams can defeat Damwon Gaming at the moment.
I also do feel like, even though, like, I've made the point the whole split, like, one of the teams, if you're an LCK fan, you should want to go to Worlds is the RX, because they look like one of the few teams who actually understand how, like, the LPL plays, etc. The problem is this. On the one hand, because of how clean they are, Damwon is the team you should want to win LCK and be the number 1 seed. But if they don't do amazingly against the LPL, all hope is lost. Because if they look this good domestically, they've got to be the best. Like, that's the only hope Korea has there. Damwon has to just be the best team in the whole world, which might not be impossible. Might not be. Maybe they know something we don't about the meta. I don't know. They've certainly got the players for it.
I like the idea of Damwon Gaming and DRX going to Worlds at the same time, purely because they are stylistically so different. Like the way they approach the pick and bans, the way they focus the map. Like, the comparison has been made before where, like, Damwon Gaming is like brute forcing their way into the victory, and DRX is trying to, like, do something really smart things, like juggle the way they play around the map, play around the draft. So, like, from the purely LCK perspective, it will benefit him to send dominating teams that are also stylistically different, just in case how the World's meta turns out. But that's me. But first, DRX has to prove that they can go to Worlds.
Yeah, I mean, there's no guarantee that they even make it, because if Damwon win and that they win Summer and then T1 get in on points, which is definitely possible, then we're looking at a Gen.G versus DRX matchup in the gauntlet, essentially. I mean, there's going to be KT and Afreeca there as well, but based on the way Summer has gone, we haven't really expected them to show up in a big way in those best of fives. And I mean, looking at DRX, like, they're very good. They obviously have the skill. They've proven many times throughout the summer split that they are, in fact, a fantastic team. But the last two series they played was a 2-1 that they barely won against the team that is 1-17 or 1-16 in the LCK, and then they lost to T1, which is, that's okay. That's a good loss, okay? But the one against Soto and Prince really gets you thinking, like, what's going on with these guys? Why are they not just able to clap them down? I mean, this is the second best team in the LCK against the current worst. This should be a very clean, easy series. And the whole series, very sloppy, all over the place. I don't really... Maybe they just were underestimating Soto and Prince. I thought Soto and Prince had a much better series than everyone expected as well. Or maybe they were just made to look good because of the way that the game played out. So it's rough because we're thinking about, the next best team, but I don't even know if we can call DRX that just yet. I really want to have them prove it in the playoffs. But if they also fall flat in the playoffs and get like 3-1 and they get like some, really strong early game one time, but the other 3 games they get clapped by Gen.G or T1, like, that's not a good look either, right? I don't think I would want that team to really go to Worlds, and that really raises the question, like, can DRX get it together on time, at the most important time, which is Worlds time? Like, they can win all these games and do great, and that's all good, but, you don't want to be like a Griffin that has an almost perfect score,
yes, of course,
in the season, and then big best of fives, they lose to SKT at the time, they go to Worlds, the greatest performance. It's like, okay, well, what did you really achieve? You were a great team, but what does it really mean in the end?
I still have the problem I have is, like, there's certain positions in League that I'm not a fan of, like, it being a rookie who's in that position. So, like, jungle is a classic one. Like, I like it when my jungler's a known quantity. I know what to expect from him. I know what performance level he's going to play at. I can't say that for Puyallup at all. Like, he's still the player that I look at on this team, and I could see him just falling apart completely in the playoffs and just having a very mediocre performance. He hasn't been in many of these scenarios. Like, he's a very young player. Like, we were talking about Canyon earlier. Canyon was showing amazing potential around this time last year, but it took him a year to actually properly develop. Like, he had to go through all these big moments where you fail, where in scrims everyone's saying you're amazing, but then on stage you don't get it done. You have a bad day, you get banned out, or you just play differently. I will say, like, Puyallup, one thing I think is very positive is he looks to have been one of the people who immediately adapted to the new Lilia champion. Like, he seems pretty decent on that that, so that's going to give him some elements. I also think the fun thing with me for DRX is, I know it's what drives LS, man, but I love the fact that their draft is always just so all over the place. Like, see, the thing about CV Max is, I think he's kind of like the Reaper of Korea in the sense that, like, he really just believes in his vision of the game, and if he thinks his vision is more correct than what everyone else is doing, he will do some really wacky drafts, even in playoff scenarios. So to me, that always adds like a little extra wrinkle where you can have a very interesting approach that it's hard to predict what they're going to do.
Interesting approach, like Talia Pantheon bot lane.
That's interesting. So interesting is a word for that, you know.
Oh my god!
Not necessarily good, but it is interesting. It is.
Oh god! Yeah.
Well, that's the problem, isn't it? If you try to be a mad genius, sometimes you just end up with the mad part. That's all that happens. Like the genius part, you only get that credit if you win the game. Everyone can do crazy picks, but to actually win the game is hard. That is hard. Because the thing is, though, that's one area, though, where if you look to Worlds, there's another reason why I want DRX to go to Worlds. Like, their drafting actually could cause a lot of problems for some of the teams from other regions, because that's one area where it's funny how storylines do repeat over history. Because if you're watching LEC at all at the moment, G2 already, again, looks like a team that's going to be a nightmare for the really, like, standard player style Korean teams. Like the way they draft everything as a flex, you can't tell where it's going. Like they're willing to play just hard through solo laners, even though in theory you're supposed to play through bot half the time in this match. Like they're just doing all the things that were causing Korean teams a nightmare last year. So I like the idea there's at least one Korean team that's just going to get in there and mix it up a bit, even though they might not win.
Isn't that also the same case for Damwon Gaming? Because Damwon Gaming is like the ultimate criminal when it comes to flexing. Like,
sure.
You don't know which champion they're gonna go. Like, you know, I can totally see a scenario where Showmaker decides to play mid Camille. When you see Sejuani from Damwon, when you see Sejuani from Damwon Gaming, you actually don't know where that's going, because it can readily go to Barrow, who will happily get Sejuani and then play it like a top laner or a jungler. Like again, you know, Wukong Senna's not a meta anymore, but you know, there was a time where like Damwon Gaming would really, really abuse the fact that they have two great Wukong players, Nuguri and Beryl. So like, you know, Damwon Gaming is another like team where individual players have such an insane champion pool, and they're so ready to do the whole flex thing. Because one thing I do really like about Damwon Gaming is all the players have admitted it, they watch the international league a lot. Like, you know, Beryl especially, when I talk to him, I can tell that he has kept up with pretty much every single LEC matches, and he picks new innovative champions out of them, and they're not hesitant to try new things or flex them around. So I know that DRX gets a lot of credit for like trying innovative picks, but we just simply can't also rule out Damwon Gaming when it comes to, you know, that school.
By the way, one thing just to clarify, it was reported recently, right, that LC playoffs is like going to be online instead of in the studio. Am I correct with that?
Mm-hmm.
But and was the last split? Did they actually play the finals of the last split in the studio? Or was that also online?
No, was on ballpark.
Yeah. It was a ballpark because the cases started to go down, so it was like looking
right
up.
There we go. Yeah, because that's one thing you have to add in as well as a factor. It's like another reason in the past why there's been classic cases like Griffin, like Gen.G, where you top the group and you go to that finals match, and then the finals match you lose. Is there's all the extra elements of you're in a studio or potentially a stadium or people are watching or the pressure. Like in theory, some of that should go away if it's an online game. If you just play from wherever you practice normally, like that might actually help some of the more rookie players. What do you think?
Oof, like, oh sorry, Valdes, do you want to go or should I kick in?
I mean, I can go. I think, well, I mean, they've been playing in this environment the whole year as well, right? Well, where there hasn't been audience, but they have been in the studio. So it's like this weird environment where you're there, you show up for work, but like, nobody else did because there's none of this extra pressure from everywhere else. It's all very kind of sterile there, the environment at LOL Park. And I think we could see something similar going over to Worlds even. And
sure,
the online thing for the LCK playoffs will be interesting as well, because will they feel differently, you know, playing in LOL Park and then going to home? Maybe some of those players fed off the energy. Like, let's say a player like Nuguri, you know, he loves just showing up to, you know, to go down there and get interviewed after his win and, you know, be on stage and stuff like that. But if he's just like in his pajamas at home, maybe he won't be able to feed off
Sure.
some of that extra energy. So there's definitely a lot of things at play. And sure, I do still think that, though, a lot of those rookie players, when there is less pressure on the line, it will be a lot easier for them. And maybe that's why DRX are beginning to look a little bit shaky now, is because things are really getting down to crunch time. Maybe CV Max is, getting in their face and saying, well, now's the time you got to show up. And maybe newer guys like Toshik will struggle under that pressure. It's a little bit of conjecture because we don't really know exactly what is, going on behind the scenes. But at the same time, these younger players, as we get into playoffs, I do worry about them. And that is why, actually, part of the reason I would predict a team like T1 or Gen.G over DRX to have a better chance in the playoffs. Or even to make Worlds at this point. Because, we're gonna have the playoffs, and it's gonna be at home. Who knows what the regionals are? Those could also be at home, depending on how Corona goes. It's really out of our control. If it gets even worse, then of course we're going to be playing from home, and we could have, our third team be selected through the home regionals. And I don't know. There's going to be a lot of pressure on those teams, and DRX have looked a little bit shaky. I think those more veteran-studded lineups like T1 and Gen.G will do a little bit better.
By the way, just to add a quick note, yesterday, one new case of COVID was found it's either in the building or next to the building that Law Park is located in.
Yes.
So that's going to add to the factor of the possibility of even the regional finals being held at home.
Right.
I think one of the reasons that DRX is struggling at the moment, and this is just me completely guessing off.
Sure.
I'll actually go with two reasons. Number one, I do interview the LCK players regularly, and I have asked DRX, Kosik, and Doran, hey, you guys do still have great performance, but you guys seem more shaky in the recent weeks. What's going on? And they have both told me that individual performances still continue to be great, but there seems to be a bit of a miscommunication when it comes to shot calling. That sometimes everyone just falls silent, or we have too much shot calls, and the communications aren't being done well. And Piercy kind of blamed himself, where he said, "Okay, I've been more active in shot calling in the later half of the summer split, and sometimes I make mistake when I try to say the right thing." And maybe he was kind of blaming himself, which is very Piercy thing to do. He can actually be quite humble, so I don't know how much of that is true, but they do have some shot calling issues that they need to sort out. And let's remember that a lot of the team players are again rookies. The second thing is, in the recent patches, the junglers have much more agency. We see the resurgence of picks like Lilia or Evelyn looks quite strong, especially in the LPL and the LEC. Those really assassin, I have to go all in and have those big playmaking moments. And when you're trying to make those plays in a very high pressure situations, I would rely slightly more on Kaz or Klid, who have had multiple finals experience, over Pyosik. Not because of the mechanical difference, but simply because of their experience. But Valdes wants to add something there because he's going back.
No.
What are you thinking about?
Okay.
Yeah. Actually, I've got a question along those lines. Actually, there's another player for T1 I think has a concern. I know everyone's focused on Faker because obviously him and Close are being subbed in and out, but I thought Kaz actually had some games that looked a bit ropey towards the end of the split. It looked like there was a more than mid lane was the position that was having issues. I think there was a few issues in T1.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that Kaz, at this point, he is one of the more veteran players on the lineup, right? So when we're talking about going into playoffs, he's got to be ready to be consistent and show up. And there were games, not necessarily super recently, not in the last week or so. I thought he looked, pretty good in the series against DRX, but some games maybe a week or two ago where I was like, what's going on? Who is this guy? Why are some of these decisions being made? And that was very disconcerting. He's a great player, but at the same time, I want my starting veteran jungle to be consistent and
exactly
ready for the best of fives. We don't want to be thinking down 2-0 as T1, do we sub in LM? Is this the time
Yes.
to put in a rookie jungler now when there's even more?
Because it's funny that, there was the whole discussion about Faker and Closer, but actually I thought that was the worst period for T1 was when they were trying out like the different junglers, and as you're saying, this LM guy came in. That experiment didn't really work very well. And the reason why that's so worrying for me is like the history of Kaz was that he was a player where he looked so ropey when he first came into that Longju team years ago, and everyone used to mock him and say he was bad and stuff. But it was obviously he just had some sort of nerve issues or some sort of decision-making issues, because at the time he was like always super high on Korean solo queue, so you knew his skills was straight fire, but he looked like in SKT he was looking really good. Obviously he'd overcome all those issues, but I worry if there's some relapse there or some confidence issue or something still. Do you know any information about this guy, Ashley, about Kaz and any of this?
Nah.
It's not anything he's ever mentioned in interviews or anything?
I don't know, if I had to compare him to Canyon, like, for example, because like Canyon is the one jungler that we should be comparing everyone to. When I talk to any of the Damwon gaming players, they just tell me that the shot calling process is super, super, super organic. But T1 has only recently started playing with Closer, and they've obviously probably changed the shot calling mechanisms. I don't know whether for better or for worse, but Baker used to be a very, very active shot caller, and when I listen to the few voice comms that gets broadcasted, Closer is much more passive. Other players might tell him, hey, it's time to roam top or try to vision around Drake, and he says yes. Okay.
Okay.
And I even asked Effort about it. Hey, does Closer say anything other than yes? And he says, oh yeah, he does check for spells and teleports. I'm like, cool.
Right.
But that has changed the shot calling hierarchy. I can't say whether it's for better or for worse, but teams need to adjust to it. So you can kind of breed that shot calling hierarchy, especially in clutch moment. So that's one of the reason that I would I'll just mention it because junglers are especially in an ideal environment. I'll say the junglers are one of the main shot callers of the team.
Yeah, makes sense. I mean, if you think about their areas other people can't see, they're going to interact with lanes. Yeah, it usually makes... Put it this way, if you ever go the other way and you hear a story that there's a jungler who's completely silent, that's usually a really bad sign. It's very rare that those are ever the best junglers. I'll actually say, by the way, that's actually one area I've heard a lot of criticism of Brox over the years of people who are Western fans. And I think if you look at his teams, there's a reason why they've always had issues with making the jungler work. I have a question for you, Ashley. Within Korea, has this split changed? As Damwon has become so consistent and so clean in their games, has it changed any of the perception with Korean fans of the idea that Korea could have the best team in the world, or maybe they're going to win worlds? I mean, if I was a fan right now, I'd be pretty confident in Damwon. They look pretty fucking good.
I think Korean teams are still hesitant. Korean teams have had so many moments where their hopes were just built up just to be crushed by mostly G2 in the last 24 months. Sure. I remember 2018 Worlds where KT was being hyped up as the team that will once again bring redemption.
Of course.
LCK just to be defeated by IG in the best of 5 scenario. T1 was supposed to win that MSI, but they lost it best of 5 against G2. T1 was supposed to, RNG or T1 was supposed to win Worlds, and then that also didn't flip out. And if any LCK fans do had very high expectation of the LCK overall, it got crushed at the MSC, where
sure. That was a bad
all the
look for sure.
team were doing super well, and Gen.G went to the semifinals just to get absolutely crushed by top esports. So
yes.
I think Korean fans are still tentative. I look at the YouTube comments, they say Damwon Gaming win Worlds, and then they say ... please, because
all
they
right,
don't believe
there
it.
we go. Okay.
So
okay.
There are high hopes on Damwon Gaming, and some people say that if LCK does have hope, it is Damwon Gaming, but I wouldn't say that they're just already writing down Damwon Gaming as the team would win Worlds. I wouldn't say that at all.
Okay. Are Korean fans watching LPL much? Do they ever watch it, do you think?
They do watch it a bit more. I think a lot of LCK team players are especially watching the LPL now that it's the playoffs time. Yeah. I think one of the observations that the LCK fans have made is that LPL simply seems to be quicker when it comes to, you know how like we call it turns. I don't know what you guys call it in the West, but we call it turns where like, we have a option of pushing the mid lane or going for the herald. So we go for the herald, like that map-wide decision-making process. We call it the turn, and we might use the turn. For example, okay, so we can decide to invest on the Rift Herald while taking some people away from the bot lane, which means that we lose some turret plates. But LPL teams seem to be faster in terms of like decision making when it comes to turns, and also they make the turns faster. So whenever there is like a little things, hey, like, you know, I spotted the jungler in our red for a split second. Let's try for dragon. So they make the map-wide decision-making faster. That's like a common discussion that I have seen come up in the Korean forums. But I'm trying to translate a lot of the Korean terminology into English. So I don't know whether I make complete sense.
Sure.
So yeah, what do you think about this?
Yeah, I mean, it's just like macro decision making, right? Where it's you decide as a team to do something, and some teams are faster than others, and that can be the difference. You know, if you're there even a half a second before the other team to set up vision and position around the Rift Heralds, and, you know, cover all your flanks and stuff like that, you're probably going to be the team that takes that one, depending on your team composition and a lot of different things, which should factor in to the decision. And I feel like, you know, speaking about Damwon again, they're one of the teams that does that really well. I feel like they're really good at reading the map state and saying, well, you know, we're a really dominant team and we could probably outplay pretty much any team right now in the LCK at this Rift Herald, but we don't necessarily need to fight over this. Whereas other teams, even DRX Gen.G T1, they'll see it and they'll be like, we rotated
They
here
always
for the Rift
fight.
Herald.
Yeah, exactly.
We have to fight. We can't back away. We'd lose too much. But then what happens is they go in and they lose the fight and they lose the Rift Herald.
Yes.
So it's like they lose even more. So some of those like split-second decisions I feel like are really fine-tuned right now for Damwon going into Worlds. And we'll see how the other teams do, because I do agree with those Korean fans, actually. I do think that the LPL teams are really quick on their feet. And I don't know if it has to do with comms or just the players that are playing, or, you know, the way that the team is set up, or really I don't have a good feel for it. Maybe we'll see a little bit more when we see LPL versus LCK again, after LCK got crushed at MSC, adapted a bit, and then had some time to rebuild. But, you know, I do kind of agree that those LPL teams overall are a bit faster, and that's something that the LCK teams do need to work on.
Like, can I propose a topic?
Sure.
So this is like a weird theory that I have, but a few dominant teams in a region shape the region's meta or play style in the long term, because like I remember LEC not necessarily being this known for innovative picks and fast plays before the domination of the current iteration of G2, but then G2 arrived. You know, they weren't just dominating with individual mechanics. Like, you know, they were using the map very intelligently. You know, they were really good at split-second decision making, and they were playing out the new innovative comps. And other teams saw their success. They were getting crushed by G2 when they did those things in the scrims. So, hey, let's try to do what they're doing, and maybe we'll see their success. And also, if there are a few dominant teams that are playing their really fast meta, then there's like a sparring process. Like the more games you play in the split-second decision-making, fast-paced meta, then you build up that muscle memory.
Sure.
And more teams end up like adopting this style. And I think that's one of the reasons that LCK has sped up, like in terms of the game time and also with the aggression and skirmishes, the split. Not only because the teams have taken the MSC results at heart and decided, okay, we're gonna try to take reference from the LPL ball. But I also believe one of the reasons is Damwon Gaming were playing the fast game. Damwon Gaming were playing the skirmishes. Like, you know, you couldn't try to go 50-50 on lanes against Damwon Gaming, because if you tried it against Nuguri or Showmaker, you get crushed. So other teams were trying to adapt to their style, and some were seeing their success. And that applies for matches, but also for scrims, because teams play scrims with other teams all the time. So I think that's another reason that LCK has sped up. And LPL has been doing this for the last 24 months, 36 months. Like, all the teams going super aggressive with each other. And if you do that all the time in matches and scrims, you build up muscle memory. You build up that instinct level split-second decision-making. And I do believe that's why LPL seems more organic when it comes to, faster turns.
One area actually similar to this conversation that I actually personally think might even help Korea when Worlds comes is the fact that the meta and generally the win conditions are so much better defined. Like last year, part of their problem against G2 was G2 had crazy picks in the draft, and on the map, G2 could make all these weird movements. Like, for example, no one could have predicted those scenarios where G2 gave up all those dragons and then still won the game. Like that was like some alien shit that no one even understood as it was happening. People thought, why are they doing this? That doesn't happen this year. Like this year, it's way more obvious when you have to fight for the dragon soul, which dragons you need to get, when you have to have the fight. I feel like that should actually play a little bit more towards Korea's side, like a little bit more obvious as to what you're supposed to do and what the correct players, as it were. What do you think?
Do you guys hear my cat? She tried to respond. I don't know if you heard that.
We did. Was it purring or something?
Oh, okay.
Did you bring it up?
It's working pretty well. No, she ran over. No, I do agree. And I think that a lot of the teams in the LCK now have even adapted that style. You look at even the bottom side of the bracket, which we really haven't talked about too much, but like Team Dynamics, Sodaewon Prince, they're both actually quite aggressive and they like to get in your face. And they've, taken almost the style from Challengers Korea, maybe also while watching the top teams in the LCK, which, Damwon, even DRX as well. Throw them in there. I think that as a whole, the majority of the LCK teams, when you just look at all the different teams, they have become a bit more aggressive overall. And some of them have even, truly embraced that style, even like 4 or 5 different teams in the LCK. So I feel like we're headed in the right direction. I don't know if that means we'll be ready on time for Worlds. That's really the question. Can Summer split with Damwon, so far ahead? Can that push the entire region up on time to get everybody at that certain level? Because as I'm thinking about this, even Gen.G have become a lot more aggressive. You were talking about like certain organizations holding on to images and stuff like that.
Yeah, certain themes.
Changed, right? And Gen.G have always been super slow, steady, even more so than T1 at times, where it was just like, oh man, Gen.G are going to win again, but do I want to watch this 55-minute game? But they have totally changed. They're actually quite aggressive now, which is very weird to see, right? As a Gen.G fan, you might be like, well, this used to be like the really, the thinkers team that, bunkered down for 45 minutes and we're going to get an Elder Drake and Baron and push to win the game. But now it's like, no, they're going to take fights at the Rift Herald. They're going to get in your face. They're going to try to win lanes. And they do have a lot of skill within the lanes, as we talked about. And you were talking about veteran junglers. I mean, Klid's right there. Guy's been played in multiple regions at a high level and is obviously quite good. Many different teams. And so I think Gen.G will find success through that new aggressive style as well, which gives me hope for them going into Worlds at the same time.
I'm trying to think if there's anything we haven't really covered. I think we've covered it all.
Predictions?
Predictions.
Yeah, what haven't we done for predictions? Go on then. Like, for example, does everyone have Damwon winning?
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
If you don't, I think you're a hardcore fan that's hoping a bit, right?
What about this then? What's the biggest like dark horse move? Like, is there a world where T1 wins it all? Like, does Gen.G go to the final? What would you pick for like a crazy prediction? Do you have one?
Like, so the first round, because the first one is actually called wildcard, and the second match is also actually called the first round of playoffs. So first round and the second round.
Who knows why that is? I don't know. I should just call it round one. But yeah, whatever. I get it. I know.
It's like the OG and Legacy kind of carried over.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
So those matches actually matter to the teams. I would actually matter more than the finals because those 2 matches actually decide who goes to Worlds.
Yes.
Like if T1 wins against Gen.G, they go to Worlds. Like if DRX beats whoever comes to the round 2 of the playoffs, they I think it's like very, very high possibility they go to Wales. And
Yes.
I think Valdes actually predicted that T1 is going to win against Gen.G when it comes to the first round of the playoffs. Would you say that?
If they play each other, would you predict T1 wins?
I don't know. I think it's going to be really close. I would actually err on the side of thinking that Gen.G would win.
Okay.
Maybe a 3-2 or a 3-1 at most. But I think it would be like a 3 to 1.5 or something like that.
Okay. So he's arrowing with Gen.G for that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's definitely something I wanted to talk about. Like Damwon look like the Kings. Is there any way to make them look, mortal? They look immortal. They look like basically nobody can take them down, and that has been the case for all of round 2. Nobody has been able to touch them, and I'm just trying to think like which team would be able to do it.
Damwon Gaming.
Yeah, well, a clone of Damwon Gaming, perhaps, but
they dropped 2 matches throughout the entire split, right?
Yes.
One was against DRX.
One
and
was the ridiculous
Gen.G.
DRX one, yeah, and the other one was Gen.G, exactly.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So
And
the teams they're
both
most likely to play.
Both times, DRX lost because they almost tripped on their own feet. It wasn't like DRX versus
Damwon.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry,
Damwon.
Okay,
So
yeah.
in both series that Damwon dropped, Damwon almost looked like they tripped it on their own feet despite having a win condition. Like it wasn't like DRX versus Gen.G where DRX looked like they're winning, but Gen.G looked like winning, but DRX actually turned the game around due to sheer mechanical, like a split second, performance, like Chobi's form and taunt.
Sure.
But I don't remember a single match where another team looked like they were genuinely overpowering Damwon and threatening their win condition and making Damwon look like a weaker team. I don't remember a single series. So therefore, because I haven't seen an example of it, I cannot think of a scenario where another LCK team will come and genuinely challenge Damwon Gaming. Except
even though exactly. Even though you were saying it half jokingly, that's like I actually think that's real analysis. Like obviously, logically, the best chance for Damwon to lose is that they just play way worse. Like someone has a terrible series, someone has nerve issues, and that opens the door. 'Cause I'm with you. They basically had to sort of like do the assist to help anyone beat them. So far, nobody. You're right. Nobody came into any series and just wrecked Damwon. It hasn't happened this split at all, ever.
yeah. I would say out of the 3 teams that could challenge them, I would say, again, I'm kind of with you guys in saying that they do look kind of unbeatable. But if there's any style from each of the 3 teams, I think that Gen.G would have the best chance. Because I think that they, it was kind of Damwon tripping over themselves in the series in round 1. And I think that round 2, Damwon looks even stronger. By the way, they've kind of like reached the next level.
Sure.
Can Gen.G reach that next level at the same time? But I do think that Gen.G's style is really good against what Damwon can do, because Damwon do just try to like force their way into winning through their insane top side of the map, which is it's like Showmaker, Nuggery, and Canyon, and then like half of Beryl is like their top side of the map. Because by the way, Beryl, he's not exactly a support player; he's like a roaming ganker player.
Yes.
So. But Gen.G is so good at like neutralizing that kind of thing. BDD, incredibly consistent in the lane. Rascal as well, rarely dies, can handle a lot of topside pressure. We've seen so much Renekton Nidalee, Renekton Lilia, Camille, Lilia, Nidalee, all this like crazy stuff that is meant to destroy your top laner and also in a way your jungler and put pressure on the mid lane at the same time and just overall forcibly pressure the enemy team out. I think that Gen.G is the one team that have shown that they're like pretty rock solid, because even Clid in the jungle is very dependable. Rascal is very dependable. So is BDD. BDD's got a good game, and the other 2 guys up on the top side are having good games as well. I think that Gen.G could potentially push it to some interesting games. I don't know if they're going to be able to defeat them in a best of 5, but again, maybe they get in their head. Maybe they take game 1 in a surprising defeat, because everything that Damwon has been doing to just like force out these weaker teams didn't work. because Gen.G figured it out and they countered it and they were just really stable and they eventually scaled up to win. And then maybe some of the cracks begin to show in Damwon's armor. Maybe some of those younger players begin to be like, I thought we were unbeatable. This always worked every single game. Why isn't it working now? So, it might be a little bit of a long shot, but I would put Gen.G as the one team that maybe have the style to potentially challenge Damwon.
One thing I found quite interesting watching the Western regions playoffs has been like a big factor has actually been like the bot lane meta and how people have drafted basically. Like in LCS, for example, there was series where people were just banning Caitlyn all the time, which is like, what, shouldn't you be picking that if you can? But, they've had a weird approach to the meta. So I actually think that's one area I'll be very interested if DRX plays Damwon, because if you want to look at a bot lane that could definitely go all over the place, like Keria has a champion Ocean. This guy, the amount of champions he has played is unbelievable for a support player. Like, traditionally as a support player, you just main whatever the main 3 or 4 are, and you just pick them based on what your AD carry wants. So if they want to have some sort of draft war, that would be an interesting angle, I think, potentially, because it's still close enough away that, things might be similar in the meta. But aside from that, it's hard to come up with reasons that Damwon should lose. You're actually right on that one, actually. It's not really a question, can DRX win? It's like, why would Damwon lose? That's the real question. And it doesn't matter for anyone else. That's the question everyone has to ask themselves.
Like, the only, if I had to dream up a scenario, two ways that Damwon could lose, I'm just almost forcing it at this point. Number one, in Damwon gaming, Beryl likes to roam. And he likes to, like Valdes said, be that 0.5 guy, roamer, aiding strength to the top lane. And if there is any team that can completely crush and neutralize you at the bot lane, it's Gen.G's bot lane. And Gen.G also likes to dive bot lane. I've seen it happen so many times. So if Ruler and just traps Ghost under the tower and just first bloods him, and then try to snowball off that while Rascal and BDD goes even against Nuguri and Showmaker, which I think they might be capable to do. That's one possible scenario. Another thing is DRX, out of the Elite 4 teams that we have looked at, DRX seemed more inconsistent. They're most volatile when it comes to their drafts and in terms of their individual performances. So I can see a day where DRX has flips a coin really, really high on top of the mountain and tries a really good pocket pick that actually catches Damwon Gaming by surprise. There could be another possible scenario, because in their highest moments, I've seen what Chobi could do. Flashing back to that Gallia format taunts, I've seen what Deft and Kara can do in really, really clutch moments. I've seen what even Thorin could do when he's allowed on impactful champions like Kennen. That's another possible scenario when it is a DRX versus Damwon Gaming finals.
Sure. This video was kindly supported by Pronogo, Whattathings, Spencer Green, Soliko, Dean Tanglis, Jack Hanna, Hades, Jensen Goh, the Puyallup Tribe, JDubs, Tobias Bernasconi, Alexander Rao, and a special thanks, as always, goes out to Jerky's Minion. Would you like to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? Maybe you'd like to put a question to me in my monthly video AMA. Do you want teasers for my upcoming content? Or maybe to even take part in an online esports discussion with moi? Well, if so, put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today in the Patreon link in the description box below.